Hello and welcome to Chapter 11 on marketing. A lot of people think that marketing is just advertising. Well, I'm here to tell you it's a lot more than that. Certainly marketing is a part of it. But we'll talk about all the different parts and pieces of marketing, at least at a very basic level in this chapter. Once you take a marketing class, you'll see that there's even more still, but we'll at least get you familiar with it. Let's talk about some of the trends in marketing that are going on right now. I thought you might find some of this interesting. One is that more and more advertising is being done digitally. You can probably identify with that. All of us expect to interact with our brands these days across multiple channels, be it through our phone, websites that we access from our computer, social media, on and on, right? But here's the thing. We expect that marketing message to have the same tone, the same cadence, and we expect the access to be the same across all of those different channels. Another trend is the fact that we all expect a personalized experience these days. That is, I think we all enjoy it when we open up Amazon and we see products recommended for you. Well, it's not just, it's not mind reading, right? They look at the things that you search for on Amazon, and they also probably pay for data from your internet provider or from Google. So you leave a digital footprint when you shop, and a lot of companies pay big bucks for that data. And then they use that information to target advertising for you when you get online. A lot of people don't realize that. So understanding this digital footprint is very, very important these days. Another trend is that selling is largely based these days on convenience. That is, a lot of us would rather take our second choice if we can get it a lot faster than our first choice. I mean, that's just kind of the way we are. Another one is that, we're looking at things these days based on not necessarily what we think is the best value, but what can we get the fastest that will meet our needs for right now, at least for some of those lesser priced items. All right, so let's kind of start walking through what we're going to cover in this chapter. We're going to talk about the objectives, the process, kind of all the different major pieces of marketing. We'll also talk about the role of the customer in the whole marketing process. We'll talk about marketing strategy. We'll talk about consumer versus businesses and how they both approach that buying process, that decision-making process. And then we'll finish up talking about social responsibility and a little bit about technology. All right, so one of the major goals of marketing is simply to facilitate long-term profitability. Well, one of the ways that we do this is through marketing. So marketing is the set of institutions, processes for creating, delivering, and exchanging offerings that have value for our customers. That is essentially what marketing is. So let's talk a little bit about utility. When we buy a product, it has to fulfill some sort of need, some sort of unmet need. That's what utility means. So let's talk about some of the different types of utility. One is form utility. So a product's form is related to the whole process of how we take raw materials from their natural state all the way through to some sort of physical thing, a product, right? So if a product that you're looking for has a particular form factor, in other words, it's got a certain shape, a certain width, certain weight, etc., That's all part of form utility. Another example might be that, let's say that you own a business and you need to transport big boxes of stuff from point A to point B. Then what form utility of a vehicle would you be looking for? A sports car? Probably not, right? You'd be looking for a truck of some kind. That would be the form utility that you are basing your buying decision on. So that would be an example of form utility. Maybe form utility you're looking for, let's take a food item, like a waffle. If you're looking for a waffle that is crisp on the outside, it has a cake-like consistency on the inside, well, maybe Eggo waffles meets that form utility for you, and so maybe you would buy that particular waffle. Okay. Let's look at time utility. So time utility, what we're talking about here is a kind of utility related to the difference of time between the creation of the product and the time it's consumed. So let's say fast food. If you've got a short amount of time to grab something to eat on the way to work, you're probably not going to go to a sit-down restaurant. You're probably going to go to a fast food restaurant because it's got the time utility that you're looking for. How about a service example? Let's say that you are walking around in Walmart and you notice that there's a nail salon inside Walmart. And you think, well, I wasn't planning on getting my nails done, but this will save me a lot of time driving to a separate nail salon later. So I've got a little bit of time now, and I'll stop in there and get my nails done, right? So you're using that nail salon because it's got the time utility that is convenient for you at that moment. Another one is place utility. So proper marketing. Make sure that products are in the right place at the right time so that you will buy the product, right? So, for example, food at an airport. We've all overpaid for a lunch, let's say, at an airport. Why? Because it's there. It's handy. Because you couldn't possibly leave the airport, go eat, and then get back through security, walk a mile all the way back to your gate, and still make your flight, right? So they've got you. They've got place utility for you. Another example might be, let's say, renting a house. The rent on a house in downtown somewhere is probably more expensive because, it's got the place utility where a lot of people prefer. It's close to all sorts of shops and restaurants and all the other conveniences. If you've got a house of the same size, the same fixtures, etc., out in the country, probably not going to be able to command the same sort of rent, right? Because it doesn't have the place utility that a lot of people are looking for. All right, and then finally, ownership utility. Ownership utility is simply making it easy for your customers to take ownership of, like the name implies. For example, car dealerships. They would advertise that very little money down and payments of only a certain amount per month. They're showing you an example of ownership utility. How about TurboTax? There's an example of ownership utility. So, they allow you to upload your W-2 simply by taking a picture of it. That makes it super easy for you to use their service of doing your taxes, right? That ownership utility is made easier for you. So, again, utility refers to satisfying some sort of unmet need, and there's a variety of different types of utility. All right, so let's look at some of the different types of marketing. One is this idea of personal marketing. So sports figures, politicians, people in the arts, they all dominate people marketing, right? But even some business people are really good at the people marketing. Let's take political ads. for politicians. I mean, that's a big one, right? They all market themselves in a variety of different ways. When they give speeches, they're marketing themselves. Their social media is marketing themselves. Everything that is their political websites, they are marketing themselves. That's a good example. But celebrities do it. They have PR people that make sure that they have the right message attached to their name, creating their image. When you have a Facebook page or a LinkedIn page, hopefully you do have a LinkedIn page, by the way, you're marketing yourself. What you put on your page, you're creating an image for you. You're creating your own brand. So be aware of that, by the way. Some other celebrities, like there's one mentioned in the book, and I thought of a couple more, like Paris Hilton. She initially gained her fame from a leaked tape, but she used that embarrassing tape to create an entire brand, clothing, perfume, I don't know what all. Kim Kardashian and Pamela Anderson, they got their start the same way. Let's look at place marketing. Place marketing involves drawing people to a particular place. So we think about Las Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? So cities and states use it a lot. Disney cruise ships, they've got commercials showing fun activities for the kids, and then they've got they show mom and dad eating at a nice restaurant together in the evening. That's all part of that place marketing. There's also event marketing. So that would be things like sponsoring athletic or cultural or charitable events. And you'll see a lot of partnerships between public and private sectors, like during the Olympics, Susan B. Komen Race for the Cure, the Super Bowl, the World Cup, all of those things. You'll see people marketing those events. And then lastly, idea marketing. Idea marketing, you're looking at trying to get influence the way that people act or think. An example might be Arrive Alive, to try to get, that's that ad campaign to try to get people to stop texting while driving, or Don't Mess with Texas, that we try to get people not to litter. So let's talk a little bit about the evolution of marketing. Remember when we covered the evolution of business back in chapter 1? During the production era, these things, they really kind of overlap what's going on in marketing. So remember in the production era, people essentially made things the way they wanted to make them because there wasn't a lot of choice, and people would buy them. Because, again, there wasn't a whole lot of choice in the marketplace. As long as things weren't too expensive, they would buy them. So it was very producer-centric. You got to the selling era, and then, for the first time, in some categories, supply exceeded demand. So people had to start putting the hard sell on people to get them to part with a little bit of money that they had. And then remember, after World War II, we got into the marketing era, because now for the first time we had lots of choice for all different categories of products. So after World War II, remember, we had been making all these military supplies. We now converted them to consumer production, and this really flooded the market. So now you're not just trying to make a good product. You're trying to convince people that your product is better than the competition. So that was the birth of the marketing concept. Make sure you know that for the test, by the way. The marketing concept is essentially that philosophy that makes customer satisfaction the central focus of the entire organization. So it also holds that delivering unmatched value to customers is the only effective way to achieve long-term profitability. Make sure you know that as well. Okay, then remember how we got to where we're at now. That is when we started to focus on building that long-term relationship with customers, because one thing that we know now is that it costs about 5 times more money to attract a brand new customer than it does to just sell more stuff to our existing customers. So it means that we really have to build a long-term relationship with our consumers, the people who buy our products and services. And by the way, when they become loyal to our company, they're much more likely to forgive our mistakes, to pay a little bit more for our products, and to tell other people about our products. And that is huge. Okay, so now that we are in this era of marketing, how do we do it? Like, how do we build that relationship with our customers? Well, that process is called customer relationship management. So just that ongoing process of acquiring, maintaining, and growing that profitable customer relationship. So in order to do that, though, we have to deliver unmatched value. And by the way, make sure you understand that that does not refer to the cheapest product necessarily. It means in the eyes of the consumer, is your product a good value for the money? And based on what that one customer is looking for, one product might have better value that they perceive than another person might for another product. Okay, so it's a lot about perception. I want to make sure that you understand that. So you can either have a limited relationship with a customer, for example, and we're talking about marketing here. So you can have a limited partnership where you may gather some information via the customer service department, the calls that come into your customer service department, or a tech support line, or maybe from conducting surveys. But if you really want to deliver or create a long-term relationship with a customer, one of the best ways to do it is through a full partnership. That full partnership is when you gather and leverage extensive information about each of your customers, and maybe even sometimes include your customers in key aspects of developing your products. That's a big difference. So value in CRM is really the key. You've delivered that value when your consumers believe that your product has a better relationship between cost and the benefits than any other competitor does. So also understand that it's about perception. So perceived value then is creating value isn't enough. You've got to help the customer believe that your product is uniquely qualified to meet their needs. That's what marketing does. It helps people perceive the value. Okay? All right. Let's talk a little bit about customer satisfaction and loyalty. Okay, so customer satisfaction is really about when your products deliver perceived value that's above or beyond your customers' expectations. So by achieving customer satisfaction, though, it's tricky. And less savvy marketers tend to fall into essentially 2 traps. So think about this. What happens if you overpromise, right? If you overpromise, that can be dangerous, because even if you deliver more value than anyone else, your customers are going to be disappointed if your product falls short of these overly high expectations. So keep your expectations high that you communicate, but don't get overly, keep it realistic. Then there's also creating that customer loyalty. You have to be careful not to underpromise. So if you don't set expectations high enough, too few customers will be willing to try your product. Of course, the result will be a tiny base of highly satisfied customers, which usually isn't enough to sustain a business. So you've got to create loyalty by getting that right mix between value and satisfaction. You got to get it just right. If you do that, again, people will buy from you again and again. They may even pay more for your product. They'll more easily forgive your mistakes. And they'll even give you valuable feedback. They may require less service, and they'll refer other people, hopefully, to your company. So how do you do all this? Well, you need to have a plan. I mean, that makes complete sense, and it sounds obvious, but a marketing plan is a very formalized document that really helps you decide where to target your efforts. It's going to help you divide your market into groups of people or segments that are similar to one another and different from everybody else. One or more of these segments will be your target market. More on that in a second. Those are the people who are most likely to buy your products, by the way. Then you've got to determine how to best use marketing tools to reach them. And we'll talk about that more on the next slide. And then third, you've got to anticipate and respond to changes in the external environment. Okay, so this is kind of looking at marketing strategy. So what this exhibit is telling us is that once we figure out who our target market is, those are the people who are most likely to buy our products or services, then we can use that information to then decide, what are we going to do with our product? What is that target market looking for in our product, the product itself? What can our target market afford to pay? How are they most likely to be influenced by what kind of promotion? And then how are we going to distribute our products or services so that they can access it easily? Now, we also have to keep in mind the things on the outside of the wheel. Now, those things we can't control. We can't control what our competitors do. We can't control what the economy is doing, what our politicians are doing. Well, not very much. We can't control technological advances in large part, and we have to respond to what's going on in our culture. So all of these things have to be included in our marketing strategy. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about that target market. So again, those are the people who are most likely to buy our products and services. So how do we choose our target market? It's going to be based on size, on profitability. It's going to be chosen on accessibility and also on our competition. So when it comes to size, there's got to be enough people in our target market to support our business, right? Profitability, the people have to be willing and able to spend more than the cost of producing and marketing our product. I mean, that just makes sense, right? And then it's got to be accessible. What we mean by that is that our target must be reachable through the channels that our business can afford. And then with regards to competition, we've got to look for markets that aren't completely crowded, because it's a lot harder to crack those markets. All right, so by the way, why not target to everyone? Well, we just can't afford to, right? We've got a limited amount of resources. A lot of that is money. Right? We only have so much marketing dollars to spend, so we've got to pick and choose what makes the most sense, where to spend our money. So that's the answer to that question. All right, let's talk a little bit about the difference between consumer and business marketers. So there is a similarity between business to consumer, also known as B2C, and it's similar to the B2B market. In other words, marketing to businesses. So the B2C market, you're selling to consumers, like it may be granola bars or toothpaste or clothing. The B2B market, maybe you're selling to other businesses, like you're selling lumber to them, or insulation, or robots, things that they're using to make other products. But you might be thinking, wait a minute, could the same products be sold in a B2C market as to a B2B market? The answer is yes. The distinction between the two market categories is not the products themselves. It actually lies in how the buyer will use the product. For example, yes, B2C. So if you are Johnson & Johnson and you're selling one of your shampoos, you'd have a marketing campaign to sell directly to the consumer. But if you're selling those same products, trying to get large retailers to buy your products, it could be the exact same products, right? But you are marketing to them in order to get them to buy from you in bulk so that your company could then resell them. So again, it is not the product that determines which category a product is. It's how it's going to be used by the buyer. Okay? All right. Let's look at how we segment markets. So if we're trying to figure out our marketing strategy, we need to know to what group that we're selling to, because different groups respond to different types of marketing messages. So let's look at demographic. So dividing the market based on measurable characteristics. We mean things like age, race, income, gender, ethnicity, all of those things. Now, you know what? That might not be as simple as you think, by the way. The book gives the example of rap music. Who do you think off the top of your head, who would you think that the main demographic for rap music would be? You might be wrong. Because the group that buys the most hip-hop music is actually suburban white boys. Who'd have thunk, right? So another way, so it's not quite as easy as it sounds. Another way to segment a market is geographic. So if you divide the market based on where people live, where do your customers live, in other words. So geographic segmentation could incorporate countries also, cities or population density as key groups. Another thing is psychographic. I know that's a $10 word, but essentially it's just dividing the market into smaller groups based on consumer attitudes or interests or values or lifestyles. This is typically used to complement other segmentations rather than just one core definition, just so you know. But let's say that you're trying to you're going to target Democrats in an urban environment that are really passionate about the environment to sell your Toyota Prius to, right? If you're trying to sell firearms and ammo, well, then you're going to target people who believe strongly in the Second Amendment, right? So that'd be an example of psychographic. And then there is behavioral. So by behavioral, what we mean is we're dividing a market based on how consumers behave towards the product. So this would include both the benefits consumers seek from the products, but also how they use the product. So grouping patterns might include things like spending, consumption, lifestyle, usage, desired benefits, brand loyalty, the benefit sought, their readiness to purchase. For example, you'd market fast food mostly probably to young men. They consume the most fast food by far. You might market low carb beer to people who are concerned about their weight or appearance. You may market a minivan or a large SUV to people with a lot of kids to haul around, right? That would be behavioral. Okay, and of course, I want to make sure you guys understand that a lot of these things, there's a lot of overlap in these things, okay? So what about categories in the business market? So B2B marketers typically follow a similar product process to the B2C marketers, but they use slightly different categories. So geographic for the B2B geographic segmentation refers to dividing the market based on the concentration of customers. And internationally, variables would also include things like language or culture or income or even regulatory differences. It could also be customer based. So the B2B market segmentation, here we're talking about a market based on characteristics of customers, such as the size or the customer type. Another way to segment the B2B market is based on product used. So here we're talking about dividing the market on how they are going to use the product itself. And again, this can have overlap. One of my little brothers works for Apple. He's a member of a sales team who works in the government market, so that's customer basis, in the educational market. That's the product use part. So there is overlap in these, but these categories are a little bit simpler in the business market, and we'll get into a little bit more of why that is in just a moment. Okay, so a moment ago I showed you that wagon wheel, that kind of wheel within a wheel. Once you figure out your target market, you're going to look at something called the marketing mix. These are the things that you can control. And by the way, there's a really good marketing mix video in the digital book, the online resources, so highly recommend that you watch those. But it's really, the marketing mix just speaks to essentially a blend of marketing strategies. And again, these are the things that your company can actually control. For example, in the product strategy, you decide what kind of features your product or service has, you decide what to name it, what image to create for it, how to package it, how to provide customer service, what kind of warranties or other guarantees to offer. How about price? You know, in the pricing strategy, the price has to be fair enough to deliver customer value relative to the benefits of that product. Very important. And then distribution strategy. Of course, the goal is to deliver the product to the right people in the right quantities, at the right time, and at the right place. And then lastly, in the promotion strategy. What we mean here, we're talking about all the ways that marketers communicate about their products. You know, it could be social media, it could be billboards, face-to-face selling, PR, product placement, word of mouth, all of those different things. So another key component here, I put this on the slide because I want to make sure that you remember that you have to re-examine the entire marketing mix based on any new country that you enter, because it could be complete, you know, something that is very effective in one country may not be in another. Something that works really well here may be completely offensive in another country. Your book has some really interesting examples about, for example, colors and what they mean here in the United States versus in other countries. It's not as simple as simply doing everything that you do here in America and then just translating it into a different language. It doesn't work that way. You have to really kind of start almost from scratch when you get to another country. Okay, so that's the marketing mix. Again, the inner part of that wheel. But what about these items on the outside? That is the competitive, the economic, the social, the cultural, technological, even the political and legal. Let's talk about those for a moment. So obviously, to avoid ambushes and to uncover new opportunities, you have to, continually look at these things about both the dominant and the emerging competitors and see how they are handling each element of the marketing mix. And then your company needs to adapt. I mean, you may be pushing the envelope, kind of being the leader, the market leader, and so other people are following your lead. That's great, but you still need to keep a close eye on what your competitors are doing. If one of them completely undercuts you when it comes to pricing, and they have very, very similar features, for example, well, you're probably going to have to take a hard look at your pricing strategy. So just kind of keeping an eye on these things. The economy, certain products are sell really well no matter what the economy is doing. Other items, are really hurt by tough economic times. For example, going out to eat. People don't go out to eat near as much when the economy is bad. But certain staple items, say in the grocery store, whether the economy is good or it's bad, people still want to buy milk and bread, as another example. So another thing is that social and cultural aspect. So anticipating and responding to trends in our culture can be especially important in industries like entertainment or fashion and technology. In fact, technology often affects marketers in ways that are less visible, but still very important. And then on the political and legal side, we have changing levels of government support for various business categories. And clearly, the political and legal issues affect heavily regulated sectors the most. So telecommunications, pharmaceuticals, firearms industry, for example, every time we go into a new presidential election, if there is a Democrat running for president, gun sales go through the roof. Other times, maybe a Democrat or a Republican is running for office, and then the marketing mix could completely change depending on how their parties tends to react to certain sectors of the economy. So those are all things that are going to change, and marketers have to be cognizant of what is going on in each of those different areas so that they can make good marketing decisions for each one of them. Let's take a look at what influences us when we make decisions. A lot of us probably don't realize how heavily influenced we are by a variety of different factors. In other words, why do we buy what we buy? Why do we buy one product instead of another? And then how do we use that product? How long do we keep a product before we decide it's time to buy a replacement? So the consumer decision-making process includes all of these different areas. Cultural is a big one, and it varies greatly from country to country, let's say, but also within subcultures. So we Americans have a culture that we all share, but we're a big country, right? We have a lot of different groups that think differently. So we have a variety of subcultures. In other words, just a smaller piece of that American culture. And then we also have social classes. So marketers have to understand that, people that make a whole lot of money think differently. They go to different places. They're interested in different types of things. The language they use may be different. Marketers have to understand those differences and change their marketing approach appropriately. Obviously, social, what our friends and families think, has a big impact on how we buy and what we buy. But also reference groups. So groups that give consumers a point of comparison is incredibly important. For example, if your reference group is highly concerned about the environment, in other words, the people that you hang out with are very concerned about the environment, and that is being socially responsible is a big part of what you talk about and discuss, well then obviously that is a reference group for you, people that have those ways of thinking. So marketers can dial into that. An example of marketing to that reference group would be green marketing, right? That would make sense that those people would be influenced best by that type of marketing. And of course, personal demographics, your gender, generally guys like some things more than women and vice versa. And then personality traits obviously have an impact on what we buy and when and why. Psychological is kind of an interesting one because, sometimes we have really pressing needs, and a lot of the marketing logic seems to go, or decision buying logic seems to go right out the window. Other times it's really tough for marketers to really understand why people bought product A versus product B. Seems like all things being equal, they would buy this product instead of that one. So you really have to dig deeper sometimes and really understand not just what the raw data is telling you. You may have to do some additional research to understand the motivations. What is the attitudes about some of the products or ideas? How do people select and organize and even interpret the same information? What I interpret may be completely different from what you interpret from the exact same message. So again, these are all things that marketers really have to be dialed into. And if successful marketing begins with the customer, then it makes sense then that understanding the customer is really critical. Again, why did they buy what they buy? When do they buy it? Why? A lot of these things really come down to what are the reasons behind people's actions. So that's what consumer behavior is all about. All right, so what about how do we make a buying decision? Sometimes it seems completely random, but for a lot of decisions, there's actually a process that we all go through, whether we realize it or not. That first step is need recognition. So I'll kind of explain these steps with an example. Let's say that you're walking around the mall and you may not have been thinking about lunch, but as you walk by the food court and you smell something tasty, you might suddenly realize that you're hungry. So you start looking at choices. You start comparing menus. You start looking at the difference in the food that you might be in the mood for. Maybe you're looking at the calories among the food choices. And then you finally start to you decide to go for the burger and fries maybe. But then how you feel afterwards. Maybe after you finish eating you regret it and wish you'd had a salad instead. By the way, that buyer's remorse is the technical term for that is cognitive dissonance. So make sure you remember that. Okay, what about business buying behavior though? Now, it's kind of a slightly similar process, but it's different in a lot of ways. In general, business behavior tends to come from a lot more logical sequence of events and a lot more logic based. It's a lot more based on some very rational input from a number of internal sources based on a really formalized process. So it's going to come from an input from a lot of people at your company, and it's going to tend to be based on highly customized goods and services and prices based on their specific needs. Okay, so we know we've got to do research in order to really understand our market, to understand kind of where their head's at, right? So that's essentially what marketing research is. You're gathering information. And the purpose of that information, by the way, is you're trying to figure out how can you invest your marketing dollars and efforts the most wisely to make the most money, as an example, or to have the biggest impact so that you can make better decisions, right? So you're going to use all of that information to identify opportunities and threats. You're going to try to figure out what the customer is going to do, try to really improve on all of those areas of your marketing mix so that you're doing those things better. You're targeting your target market more appropriately. All right, it's a couple of different types of marketing research. One is secondary data. That's that existing data that's already out there, right? So this is information that you can get from internal sales data or from doing web searches or buying some sort of commercially available research. And then there's primary data. So that's brand new data that you compile for a specific research product or a project. All right, so there's some pros and cons of that research. We'll talk about that in a moment. But let's talk about the primary research, right? So if you can't find the research data that's already out there, that already exists, then you may have to gather it yourself. A couple of different ways to do that. One is through observation research. The important thing to note here is that in this type of research, the researchers do not interact with the research subjects. Now, one advantage of using observation research is that you don't have to worry about inaccurate or dishonest answers from the respondents. However, it's kind of limited because you don't really understand the motivations behind their decisions. So yeah, you can use scanner data from retail sales, or you can analyze road traffic, things like that through observation, but you don't know why. Now, on the other hand, in survey research, the researchers do interact with the research subjects. So unlike observation research, though, when it comes to survey research, you can secure information about the way people feel and the way they think, things that can't be observed. But the problem with it is that people often don't tell the complete truth, or they say what they think makes them look good to the person asking them, and people don't necessarily do it on purpose. Here's a good example of some of the fallacies of survey research. The 2016 presidential election polls. All the pollsters conducting surveys of people before they voted and even people walking out. Based on that research, marketers were absolutely 100% sure that Hillary was going to win the election, in a landslide, in fact. Turns out, those people weren't all truthful, and it was completely wrong. So some examples of survey research. That would be like conducting a phone interview, phone survey, or an online survey, or in-person surveys, or door-to-door surveys, or focus groups. Focus groups is a type of survey. A mail-in questionnaire might be another. All right, so just some pros and cons, kind of looking at these side by side. So again, your secondary research data, it already exists. It's cheaper. But the problem is, you know what? Your competitors have it too, and it might not meet your needs. You might need more. And by the way, it might be outdated. Who knows how old? You've got to figure out how old it is, because people's buying habits change all the time. Now, you might need to go to primary data. So obviously, try secondary data first. It might have all the information that you need, but if it doesn't, then you would add primary data to it. So you compile that information yourself. It's going to be a lot more customized. It's going to be, brand new data. Your competitors don't have it. But of course, on the other hand, it's obviously, it's going to be more expensive because you're having to pay to do it. And then lastly, socially responsible marketing is all the rage right now, especially with the millennial generation. So any marketing that speaks to helping others, that's a great thing. Abolishing sweatshops, green marketing is a big piece of that social responsibility piece. And of course, a lot of it is absolutely sincere, and yes, it's probably true that some of it is done just for good PR, but hopefully not. And then lastly, technology has really revolutionized a lot of the way that we do marketing. For example, mass customization is a good example. You can get online, go to Dell.com, for example, and not just buy a computer that's already pre-configured, but you could customize it the way that you want it. Maybe even pick the color, the size of the hard drive, the amount of RAM, the video card, all those things. So mass customization is another piece of it. All right, so that was the basics of marketing. Make sure you're familiar with all of these terms prior to taking the exam. I would know the definition of all of these things. Then also, these are some of the main topics that we covered in this chapter. So make sure that you're familiar with those before the exam. And if you have any questions or issues, be sure and give me a call.